ConstructionCast. Very pleased to have with us today some great delay experts for the Battle of the Delay Analysts, which we've kind of titled a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I don't think we're going to have too much combat going on, but we'll see how it goes. A few little usual parish notices at the start. If you have any issues, drop Annie an email, annie@limeslade.com. She can help you out. Some of the usual bits and pieces, diving in using Chrome is the best browser, or Safari. Try and avoid Microsoft Edge or Microsoft Internet Explorer. Neither of those tend to work so well with this system. Other than that, I shall just announce the next session that we've got coming up. So we're going to have a look at diversity. Now, we were always planning to do a session on diversity, but obviously the last week or so has brought that into sharp focus. So in 2 weeks' time, we've got Bola Abisogun, who's the founder of Diverse Surveyors in the City, quite a well-known figure within diversity in construction and surveying. We've got Teresa Mohammed, who's the partner at Trowers and Hamlins, and we're looking to get somebody from the real estate sector as well to join us for that one. So do sign up for that if you can. I've just realised I've put the link at the bottom as the wrong address. It's ConstructionCast 12, not ConstructionCast 11 next time. So if you're wanting to sign up, it's limeslade.clickmeeting.com/ConstructionCast 12. Okay, so I shall introduce the speakers for today. The first of our speakers today is David Stone, a delay expert who's worked on projects throughout the UK, Europe and the world. He's worked with some renowned experts such as Dr. Franco Mastrandrea and some of the biggest disputes in the world. He now has his own practice, FieldStone DA, based out in the west of London, sort of Berkshire area. We've got Michelle Metz. Michelle, I first met Michelle. I've had the honour, actually, I should point out at this stage, I do declare an interest, had the honour of working with all of these people in one capacity or another in the last sort of 20 years or so. So Michelle was probably the person of all of these people who I met the first. First met her out in Hong Kong, where she trained as a planner on lots of the big projects and high-rise projects and the airport projects and things like that out there. She used to run the Hong Kong office of Advanced Consulting before taking a little time out and then returning to work with Hill International. And she's now a partner at the firm HKA. So Michelle has over 28 years of experience in the sector. And finally, but by no means least, of course, Tom Francis, who's another person from the Hill International dynasty. He started his career at Costain as a planner before joining Knowles, and he's now a director of Decipher Consulting based in Manchester. So those are three delay experts. Now, as always, with these little sessions, we're just going to kick off with a little look at COVID-19 and where we're up to with those sorts of things. Not a huge amount has changed, I don't think, in the last 2 weeks, although things are starting to return back to work on site. So the Construction Leadership Council have published their latest document, which is the CLC's recovery roadmap. And Tom, hopefully you've had a chance to have a little look at that. And if people are interested, it's at constructionleadershipcouncil.co.uk. And they outline a full sort of plan for the road to recovery. Tom, have you got any thoughts on that and whether it would be helpful for the industry?
Yes, Stuart. So I think obviously it's quite a new document. This came out last week. And we've heard quite a bit from the Construction Leadership Council over the past few months. I guess they kind of come to the fore in terms of site operating procedures that they've issued, which have given guidance to the industry over the last few months. And obviously those guidance rules have relaxed somewhat from the first version back in April to now. I think this new document is admirable for its aims, quite wide-reaching. They talk about strategy drive recovery following COVID-19. Certainly recommend a reading if you haven't seen it. And they set out like three phases to the recovery. So the first 3 months is the restart, increasing output, minimising disruption, and maximising employment in the short term. And then longer term, they talk about resetting and reinventing over the next 12 to 24 months. And in terms of transforming the industry on the back of the changes that have come up from COVID-19. I think quite wide range in what they're trying to achieve. And I list some of the things it talks about: improvements to life cycle performance, skills, building safety, net carbon zero fair prices and innovation. And I think my point is really going to achieve all this in the current circumstances. Is COVID-19 really going to be the time to do it when some of these issues have been prevalent for a number of years? I think The biggest takeaway I take from the report as a planner is what it talks about productivity. So it says that we need new approaches to compensate for the loss of productivity as a result of these measures that come in place in terms of social distancing and the like. And if you read the report, it touches on two areas in that regard, which is digitisation and a presumption for off-site manufacture. And my thoughts there are those companies that have invested heavily in that pre-COVID-19 may well reap the rewards going forward in the new way of working. But I think it's probably a tall order for potential contractors who are on low margins to try and invest in those areas during the current circumstances.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. David, just following on from that, the CLC recommend that firms sign up to the RICS's conflict avoidance pledge. I don't know if everyone's familiar with this, but it's something I think that's been around for a little while now. Do we think that's likely to be adopted by firms, and will it actually help to reduce disputes?
Well, it sets out a procedure, a set of principles on which parties to contracts can work to try and reach an agreement before claims get into dispute. And that, I believe, that would be a very good thing to follow, because let's face it, we're going to have a lot of claims. There's going to be a plethora of delay claims coming up. And the more you can do to reach an agreement, the better. But you have to bear in mind that there are various steps that are set out, and the final one of these is dispute resolution. And if you don't get it sorted out by agreement, you are going to get into dispute. And that's when you're going to need the data and the information. So if I was a contractor making a claim, I would make sure that I had all the information and get it together at this stage, at the earliest stage, before going on to getting into a claim situation. Do your best to talk things through and come to an agreement with the opposite party, but be prepared for any claim situation. And in order to do that, you need to have, first of all, a load of all the records that you need. And you will need, for delay claims, you will need to know what the contractual delay situation was before lockdown. Was the project in delay? Was it whose fault was it, if any? And then after that, you need to look ahead and figure out what you're going to do, how you're going to plan any startup, bearing in mind that most sites will now have started up back already. So it's a question of, yes, do try and follow the guidance, but be prepared for more conflict or conflict resolution, dispute resolution.
Yeah. Do you think that, obviously, they're trying to get people, encourage people to work together and get agreements and things like that. Do you think that's likely to happen? Do you think there's?
I think it's probably more so than normal, insofar as contractors and employers. This is a completely new situation, and it would help if they didn't get into entrenched positions. And so discussion at this stage, I'm sure, will help. And the people that see that will more likely be able to make an advance to a settlement than they perhaps would have done if they were following the procedures previously.
Good stuff. Okay. Michelle, just picking up on those. So obviously David's mentioned some points about keeping your records and getting prepared for things. Is there anything else that you think you can add to that at all? Is there anything that people ought to be doing at this stage?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. And thank you for inviting me today to participate as a presenter. Really appreciate that. Other measures contractors and clients can take to reduce conflicts and disputes. Well, I think really, David's covered quite a few of those, but really I think it comes down to back to fundamentals in terms of management of the data, the information and the project. And those fundamentals really are going to be, as David's already mentioned, it's good record keeping. And this is an absolute fundamental, because those records have got to be fit for purpose. you shouldn't be keeping records for records' sake. I mean, they really need to have the information on there that is going to be relied on. So things like dates, progress information, resources, what area the work was being conducted in, disciplines, etc. So that's your base data that you're going to need. But you're also going to need to make sure that good schedules are being kept. So you've got a good data set of schedules. And those schedules need to be dynamic in nature. They need to be able to react to change. They need to be updated on a regular basis. They've got to record the work that was already done, when it was started, when it was completed, your percentage complete of progress, because it's going to be really important to know, as David's already mentioned, the state of the work before COVID occurred, when it occurred, and then the ongoing effect that it's having through the course of the job. I'm actually working with a client actually now where we are making sure that we've got this data set up and running so that they can view, and they're dealing collaboratively actually with the contractor to make sure that they've got a decent data set. So they're going to be able to work out where the contractor was when the COVID situation occurred and how it's unfolding as time has gone on. Other things that they need to be actually doing is also putting in their timely notifications and abiding by the contract conditions. Because if you're doing all of these things, then basically you're going to be trying to deal with the conflict as close as possible to when it occurred. So you're going to avoid a dispute happening in the future. And I think, David touched on it as well, and I think you touched on it, Stuart. It's all about collaboration between the parties. And those parties that are successful are the ones that keep the good records, keep the good data set, and actually collaborate. So I think really it just comes back to the fundamentals all the time. And the ones where we don't see that there's success in being able to deal with the claims before they go to disputes is often where they don't have these fundamentals in place.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's come out time and time again in all the seminars that I've been to in the last few weeks, and all the talks that we've given and attended is records. It does continue to be the theme of everything that we do, but more than that, good records and useful records. So thanks, Michelle. So sticking with Michelle, obviously we met a long time ago, as I've already said. Obviously not that long time ago. You were much younger, but I was even younger. So since we met, delay analysis seems to have evolved a bit. Back in the days of the Hong Kong airport, our old colleague Keith Pickavance and the SCL protocol very much favoured a particular method of analysis, and things were done perhaps slightly differently than they are now. Do you think evolution has been a good thing? Do you still come across experts who have a favoured methodology, a favoured way of doing things, or is that now less of a thing in delay analysis? How have things changed over the last sort of, I don't know, however long we've been doing this?
We've been doing it for quite some time, Stuart, and it's quite scary when I look back and think when we first met, how many years ago that was, and you haven't aged at all, but yeah, it hasn't been quite so kind to me. But I mean, interestingly enough, I'd say back in the day of working with Keith, he did utilise more than one method. I utilised a couple of methods with Keith, but he definitely did prefer one particular form of methodologies. But in terms of the different methods of delay analysis, I'd say that they've always been out there. And maybe it seems as though they have evolved, but perhaps that's because we've had the development of the SCL protocol. It's now in its second edition. We've also had the AACEI's recommended protocol 2903. And those guidelines really have paved the way to prepare and helped communicate the different methods that are out there and to really consolidate those techniques. So I think the different methods have always been out there. There have been some that have been favoured more than others. But I think those two guidelines have really consolidated the techniques. I think in terms of favoured methodology, I can only really speak to myself and the other analysts that I've worked with. But when it comes to a favoured choice, I would actually say in all of those cases, the analysts have made sure that they're selecting an appropriate methodology. And that's going to be based on some fundamental considerations when making those choices, because at the end of the day, those certain methodologies can only be adopted if there's certain data and information available. So therefore, when making a choice of which method to adopt, each analyst is always going to ask themselves the basic questions. What does the contract say? Usually the contract is silent, but does it actually specify a type of methodology? A choice of methodology as well is going to depend on the stage of the claim, the dispute, whether it's in the currency of the work, whether it's at the beginning of the job or the end of the job. But really, I think in my experience and for the analysts that I've worked with, one of the big deciding factors on choices is what records are available. And it comes back to record keeping time and time again, because, you know, if you haven't got the as-built records, you're really limited on what method that you can use. Same if you haven't got the progress data, if you haven't got resource information. And also another deal breaker in terms of methodology choice is what schedules are actually available. So, you know, have you got soft copies of them? Is there a baseline program? Is there updated programs, and how frequently are those updated? How reliable are those schedules? And have those schedules actually been produced to manage the project, or was it really just, you know, a tick box exercise? So really, a recap, I think different methods have been around for a long time, but I think they've been consolidated in those two guidelines. And in choice of methodology, I think from my experience, it really comes down to what information that you've got and the timing, etc. So yeah, so sorry, that's what I think in terms of methodology.
Thanks, Michelle. Just sticking with a similar sort of theme, David, you know, obviously there are a lot of methods out there. Delay analysis is often referred to as this dark art that people don't understand, perhaps. So, you know, with there being so many methodologies and so many different names, can you give us any, and obviously we can't go into a full detail on that, all the methods and how they work and all of that sort of thing, and you can't, it takes a long time to deal with those even in a presentation or in learning them as an expert. But can you give us a quick overview of why there are so many methods and what the merits and drawbacks of the different methodologies are?
Yes, I think it's because basically the methods have developed over time, and as Michelle says, it depends on circumstances, what information is available, and certain methods suit certain different situations. As a general principle, there are two strands to the different methods, and those are either prospective or retrospective. Prospective, you'd stand at a point in time and you look ahead, and those time impact analysis is one example of that, and you can forecast what would happen given a certain delay event. Retrospectively, you stand at the end of a project, or you look back partway through a project and you look at what has happened and you try and find a cause that caused that effect by analyzing the programs. In addition to these methods set out in the SCL protocol and the AACI recommended practice, it doesn't mean that you have to keep to those, because there are situations where you can rely on common sense data and clear data, and you're not bound by any of these methods. There was a case last year, White and PBS in New South Wales, and that pointed out that there was a method was a logical and rational approach, and it didn't mean it wasn't acceptable if it wasn't in the SCL protocol. Going on from there, there are, looking at the time impact, that those methods in the past been used in a way that has been exaggerated, and they're open to manipulation, and it's very difficult to try that method and use it without projecting a delay which is longer than would happen or longer than did happen. So I tend to favor more the as planned, as built, which is a retrospective look. And you base your information or your analysis on what has actually happened. But there are, in that situation, you're still reliant on a forecast program, because each time that you look at something that has happened, you are relying on what the forecast will be. Therefore, there is still an element of theory in there. And bearing in mind in COVID-19, situations arise where the program is changed completely. For instance, if you have suppliers are held up and delayed, that could impact the program and change the critical path to a completely different area of the work, so that you would have to take that into account when you're doing your analysis. So all in all, I think there's no one particular method that is necessarily suitable. It's a horses for courses situation. And I'd say in COVID-19 situations, you have to keep a lookout for what might happen. And let's face it, there might be a second wave that comes up, and people are, doing claims, and then something else happens that you have to take into account. So keeping on top of things is really important, I think. And contractors and employers are well advised to get their information sorted and understand what has been happening.
Good. Okay. Thanks, David. So just following on that, Tom, been lots of well-publicised cases over the years of experts who've been criticised for various reasons. There's the well-publicised Skanska-Onega case, Brandt and O'Barrett, Alstom and Yokogawa. And often the experts have been criticised for the highly theoretical nature of their analyses and perhaps a failure to look at the facts in detail. Is this a particular challenge, do you think, for delay experts in particular, and how do you tackle that challenge as a delay expert? How do you manage to avoid those kind of traps?
So I think on that, Stuart, I think it can be a challenge when the information you've got is poor and you're sort of forced down a certain route, perhaps to do some perspective, that's some sort of modelled analysis. But in most instances, in my experience, particularly after the event, there's usually enough information not to have to do that. So I think the starting point is, in my view, to stick with a retrospective form of analysis to start with. I think you're more likely to align your analysis with the factual evidence in that way. And then I think there's been a bit of a trend towards those retrospective methods over the last few years, particularly with what the SCL second edition now advocates, where it states that, after the event, so when the works are finished or many months after the event's arisen, then the preference for the prospective form of analysis, like a time impact analysis, is no longer the preferred approach. And I advocate that. I think it's the right way. In my view, I'm seeing more and more other experts on the side doing one of two methods, which is either an as-planned, as-built windows or a time-sliced windows analysis, both retrospective, looking at instances of delay over time. I think they're the right ways to go when you've got the records to do that. And hopefully, if you do that, you should avoid some of the criticism of the output of your analysis, as David mentioned, projecting something totally different to what the facts say. It's interesting to note some of the recent cases. They all seem to present the same. There's quite a lot of the judgments have the same statement, which is delay is a matter of fact. And I say this to the guys in my team: ignore the analysis for a moment, put it to one side. What do the facts say? Do they speak of delay in accordance with the event that we believe caused delay? And if they do, and our analysis says the same, there's a good alignment there. So I think two fronts really is, one, in my view, I think you should do some retrospective when the work's finished. If you've got the information to do so. And secondly, I think you should always validate that against the contemporary information, so meeting minutes, progress reports and the like. And quite often you'll find snippets of evidence in there that point towards something being critical, as the site team believed it to be at the time, that aligned with your analysis. And then you're on a stronger footing, I think, to rebut any suggestions that your analysis is theoretical. So I think it's been a general trend towards retrospective approaches. Having said that, we still get a lot of inquiries from the Middle East, where the client always starts off saying, we want a TIA, a time impact analysis. So, we've agreed it, or the engineers stated we need to do that. And sometimes it's a question of, well, is that correct now that you're 2 years down the line from the job being complete? So perhaps there's a difference in jurisdiction, I don't know. But that's my take, is one, in my view, after the event retrospective, and then, consider the facts and verify against those, you should be in a reasonable position.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Just a quick question that's come up now. I'm going to move on to the kind of Q&A side of things, I think. So firstly, and if anybody does have any questions, do type them in the box down the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We'd really like to have your questions, even if they seem to you like stupid questions. There's probably not stupid questions. There's all sorts of jargon wrapped up in delay analysis that might have cropped up in the last few minutes. So if you want any of that explaining, just do pop it in the question box down the bottom right. First question I'm going to ask, there's two questions that I've got, and then there's one on the screen already. So firstly, there's been a question in asking about books and guidance. Can the speakers think of any books that they would recommend for people who are not familiar with delay analysis, who'd like to know a little bit more on how to understand it? Maybe delay analysis for dummies or something like that, perhaps.
Well, first of all, I'd always say the SCL protocol. I know it's not a book, but the delay and disruption protocol, I think, is quite a good document. There's also, and I've got it here actually. Don't know if you can see that. It's the Keenan Collector book, actually. Delay analysis and construction contracts is not bad. It's quite an easy read as well. But yeah, I think the SCL delay and disruption protocol, maybe the Keenan Collector book are pretty useful. I don't know if the others have got any preferred ones.
I know one that was done a few years called Time at Large, which is a good introduction. It's easily understandable, and that will give you a good introduction to the area of work that we're working in for a beginner.
And here's my suggestion, which is, I think it may be out of print now, but it's a few years old. Yeah. Simple About Time, which is quite a little bit of good guidance.
Out of Time.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the other one.
Losley in the Net one.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, that's very popular. I know our old colleague Jeff Busey used to recommend that as a guide as well. I think it is out of print, but if you might be lucky and get one on eBay or somewhere like that. The other question that I had, I know a debate that used to come up a lot when we all used to work together is around software. And is there any software? Do you stick with the software that was used in the original project, or do you transfer stuff into Primavera or the Rolls-Royce planning products? What do you tend to do, or what's recommended, I suppose?
Personally, I stick with what's used on site. I think that you can, personally speaking, you can open yourself up to issues if you start chopping and changing into other software, if you're going to be using that as the base. Although, having said that, there's no reason why, if you're doing new stuff, that you can't put that into your preferred piece of software. But I have a tendency to use the software that's been used during the course of the contract, and that's the relied upon information.
Good stuff.
I second that. I think use what you're presented with, and I'd sometimes use a different system for presentation purposes, but nothing more.
I think I'll just add that if you transfer from one to the other, you can get errors.
Yeah.
And logic links change, so just don't go there. It's my view.
Okay, I've got a question that's come in. Does the SCL recommend retrospective TIA prescribed by the AACI? Oh, that's complicated. Yeah, so there's the question on the screen. Anybody got any thoughts on that? Has that been prescribed by the AACI? And does the SCL recommend it? Does anybody know? Yeah,
if I can take that one to begin with, and anyone else can chip in. The first edition of the SEL, which was 2002, tended to recommend time impact. The second edition in 2017 does not recommend any particular system or method. So I would say the answer to that is, even though it's retrospective TIA, I would say it does not recommend that, and I would not recommend retrospective TIA, because you're in the situation where you have all the information in front of you, and that you're going back in time and looking at what would have happened at the time that you knew, but now you've got all the information you need. There was a case many years ago, or 100 years ago, and it's quite often quoted, where the judge came up with a view that if you have the information in front of you and you've got that lighting up the information, you've got the light of day in front of you, why would you grope around in the dark trying to find some theoretical answer to your problems?
Brilliant. Any other thoughts on that at all?
I think that the second edition of the protocol actually states after a number of months or period after the event, then I'm not sure the exact wording, but the preference for a prospective method or prospective method probably no longer applies. So certainly trend away from the first edition. There's a certain wording in there that states that. So,
yeah. Sorry, Tom, it says something about not too distant from the commencement of the event, something like that. So it needs to be, the analysis, if you're going to use the TIA, I think it needs to be quite close in point of time to when the events occurred. So, anything that happens quite some time after, it's saying, no, use something else.
Good stuff. Okay, just trying to see if there's anything. There is a question about force majeure, but we don't have any lawyers on the line, and I'm going to answer the question about whether this is force majeure or whether COVID. The question is whether COVID-19 is force majeure. I'm going to take the bold step of recommending a seminar that I've been sent an invite to tomorrow by Burkitt's LLP. Just trying to remember the title, but it's something like "Forget Force Majeure" and something else. What's actually happening? And I think that kind of the title that they've given you kind of gives you an indication of what they think of force majeure as an argument. So I will, Ravinder, I'll drop you a note separately and point you in the direction of that webinar hosted by Burkitt's. As a free advert for Burkitt's. I hope Mr. Rush appreciates that. So that looks like quite an interesting session tomorrow, taking quite a kind of pragmatic perspective on the use of force majeure and arguments along those lines. So I think that pretty much concludes what we had to say for today. So unless anybody on the panel has got any other points or questions they'd like to make, I think we'll wrap up. And thank you all very much. Tom, Michelle and David, any points you wanted to just finish with, or are you happy with that?
Oh, thank you, Stuart.
I'm happy with that. Thanks, Stuart.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Apologies to anyone who had issues with the sound. There did seem to be a few comments about that some people couldn't hear, but we will publish this, hopefully the recording afterwards, so people can listen to it at your leisure. So thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thanks. Bye.
All right.